Okay, we're in the middle of chapter 8 here in the Maimer of Hamishpatim Tafshim Aleph. We're holding the second paragraph on the page. In our copies, we're on page Chav Gimel, right? The second paragraph, Yesh Lemar. So, what the Rebbe was saying here, we went into a whole conversation about Limud HaTorah, about studying Torah. We explain these opening psukim of Parshas Mishpatim, which are talking about acquiring a servant, a slave. And we said that this is talking about learning Torah, how a Yid is supposed to learn Torah. So, we said, Tasim Lifneim, a person has to study Torah in a way that he understands it thoroughly, Tamam Yashav Talmudam. And then we said, Kisikna Eved Ivri. Right, so we said Kisikna. Kisikna means that you have to recognize that the Torah, even though you understand it thoroughly, Tasim Lifneim, you understand it so well that it becomes your Torah, we can call it yours. You have sort of authority on Torah, but at the same time you recognize that it's still Kisikna, it's Torah is like it's in Atzilus, it's Torah that's beyond your comprehension, your understanding. Right? And
given the sickness to Atzilus,
because Atzilus is called Kinyan, right? They say Baruch Kainech, right? Kinyan is Atzilus because Kinyan, we explained that Kinyan is only a Gilei Helen, right? It's only Megala what's before. Bria is a new thing. Okay, so the point is that Kinyan is that Kisikna, that's Atzilus, so meaning that Torah is really, even as it's down here, even as we understand it, even as it becomes ours, we recognize that Torah is really beyond all of it. Or to put it in other terms, the fact when a Yid studies Torah and understands it so well, he comes to the realization that really he has no business understanding Torah. Why does he understand Torah? Because really Torah is even higher than his understanding. It's just because the Eibishter it can do the impossible. So he can take something that's infinite and put it into a finite mind, we can understand it. So what's that cause? That causes a bittul. That causes avdus. A person becomes battle to the Eibishter the more the person understands Torah and studies it properly. We had other details, but let's leave those. We'll have to go back and review that again. Let's move forward. What's necessary here for us to move forward is to recognize this idea that the Yid studies Torah. On the one hand, he understands it thoroughly. On the other hand, there's total bittul, total surrender to the Eibishter, right? And so this we find by Torah. Limud HaTorah. When it comes to studying Torah, we have these two elements, right? On the one hand, your mitzias, your understanding, your ability, your talents, and on the other hand, total submission to the Eibishter. And that's why also the Torah opens up after Har Sinai, after the Asar Sibs, after Mount Sinai, after we're just getting started here. We open right away with Ve'el Hamishpatim. Why did we start with this? Because this is a general statement that's giving us perspective on all of how we're supposed to study Torah. But it's not just about how we're supposed to study Torah, it's also how we're supposed to perform mitzvahs. And that the Rebbe continues in chapter 8, where he explains this idea of Gadol Talmud Shemevid L'Maisa. The Gemara says that, the Gemara asks, what's greater, study or action? And the Gemara says, studying is greater because study leads to action. So what's a simple understanding of it is that if you just do action, you can do action without having to study. You can be an ignoramus and do, right? But if I'm studying and it leads to action, so I have both. So I have the best of both worlds. So you can get two for the price of one. So studying is greater because study leads to action. But Chassidus explains, the Rebbe is explaining here, Gadol Talmud Shemevid L'Maisa means that the study itself carries over into the Maisa. It's not just that it leads to action, but what we can achieve is they come together. So we explain because Torah is higher, it brings the two together. You can have, on one hand, your mitzvahs, your intellect, your understanding, and on the other hand, you can have total submission to Hashem. So that is Mevi Lidei Maisa. We carry that into Maisa. That in our actions as well, we have both of these attitudes, both of these feelings. The idea of, on one hand, total submission, obedience, and observance of the commandments, and at the same time, a passion in it. And what's the passion we're talking about? The passion, we're not talking about passion about a mitzvah. You know, you tell sometimes somebody does, why do I do something? So you say, the more you learn about the reason behind the mitzvah, the more enthusiastic you'll be about the mitzvah. We're not talking about that kind of enthusiasm. We're not talking about enthusiasm because you can appreciate the mitzvah. We're talking about enthusiasm in the bittul. The enthusiasm is in the obedience. You're enthusiastically obedient. So obedience usually means it's dry. If you're obedient, you have to do what you're told to do. There's no joy. We're going to explore this idea a little bit more. But that's, here we're saying that the chayis, the excitement, the pleasure, the passion is in the obedience itself. Okay? That comes from Torah. So now,
you understand it more, you're more bitter. The more you understand, the more bitter you have.
Yeah. And the more passionate you are about your obedience. Yeah. Okay. So the second paragraph here in chapter 8. Okay, v'yesh leimar d'matayim b'malzeh shaschol asat zivuim b'der parshas mishpatim. Hu b'pasuk ve'ela mishpatim asher tasim lifneim shemedaber b'limed HaTorah k'dashas chazal hu v'leil siv gimel. Yeah, so now we can understand another interesting thing, which is that our parsha starts usually in the Torah commandments come with the term Tzav b'nei Yisrael. Vaydaber Shem Moshe Leimer, Hashem tells to Moshe, Tzav, command the Yidden, right? V'atat Tzav, which we just read, V'atat Tzav, but it has to do with Tzivui. Here we're starting to talk about all kinds of laws, so it should start the same way. Command them regarding these different laws. But here we have like a whole introduction. There's an entire pasuk. The whole first pasuk of Parshas Hamishpatim, Ve'ela Hamishpatim Asher Tasim Lifneim, that's an entire pasuk, and the whole pasuk is like a general introduction. It's telling us about, and what we learned earlier in chapter 3, that's talking to a teacher, how to teach your students. Right? We don't ever find that. We don't find that Hashem tells Moshe, this is how you should explain it to the people. He just says, tell them, command them. And here there's like a whole introduction, how it should be done. Right, the opening of usually Hashem tells Moshe, he says, speak to them. Tzavez b'nei Yisrael, command them. It doesn't discuss the way in which to teach them, how they're supposed to go about studying these laws. Right? And here, is Talmud in a way that you understand it, teach them thoroughly. So it's telling us how to teach it to them. Why is that the case here? It says like this, because the fact that our Parsha, Mishpatim, opens with the laws of Eved, of a servant, this alludes to the fact that all of our observance, that the way we observe all of the mitzvahs, has to be in a manner of avdos, of an Eved, of servitude. And since, as we said earlier, that it's not enough just to be subservient, it's not enough to be obedient, you also have to have passion, enthusiasm in that obedience. So therefore, since it has to have enthusiasm and pleasure, so that's why the parsha opens with studying Torah. How we supposed to approach these laws. With study. Why? Because the pleasure and the passion that a person has in studying Torah then carries over into the mitzvahs. In other words, like I mentioned just before, somebody is not passionate about observance. So you tell them, you learn. The more you learn the reason behind the mitzvahs, the meaning behind the mitzvahs, the more enthusiastic and interested you'll be in them, right? You see the rationale behind the law, let's say, or the mystical significance, whatever it is that specifically speaks to your soul, whatever style it is that gets you, that'll get you enthusiastic. So, but where's your enthusiasm? When a person who studies the reason behind the mitzvah and then does the mitzvah enthusiastically, where's the passion? The passion is not in the observance of the mitzvah, the passion is in the reason of the mitzvah. So the passion's in the limud, the passion's in the study, not in the observance. That's what he's saying here. That he closes out over here. That when we're talking about the observance, we have to carry that pleasure that you have in the learning has to be translated into the actual observance as well. Now, all of this whole lengthy explanation that we went through the last few chapters, talking about limud Torah, studying Torah, and how you have to have these two elements of bittul and mitzias. All of this is an introduction to answer a question we asked in the beginning of the Maimer. We asked why. One of the questions we asked in the beginning of the Maimer was, why do we open with the din of Eved Ivri? Right? Why does it start with Eved Ivri? Eved Ivri, and especially a specific type of Eved Ivri. Number one, it's an unpleasant topic. We'd rather maybe avoid it altogether, right? This whole concept. But also, we're talking about a specific type of servitude. We're talking about a servant who is sold by Bezdin because he stole. Like it's something that is not even a common thing. And that's the opening statement. So that was the question we asked. So now, everything we said till now is an introduction to explain it. So already we can know what the answer is. Based on what we said, we realize, why do we start with Eved? Because that's the whole point is, right, the servitude. But then the other question is, if we're talking about servitude, so then why start with Eved Ivri, start with Eved Kanaini? That was another question we asked, right? Eved Kanaini, a non-Jewish bondsman, has even more servitude, right, than the Eved Ivri, in which the servitude has some restrictions. So if emphasis on Avdos, so start with Eved Kanaini. So now that we just explained that we're talking about, you have to have on the one hand servitude and obedience, and on the other hand there has to be pleasure, so we can already and enthusiasm, passion, so we can already understand it. But the Rebbe is going to take a very nuanced and complex approach to explaining this thing. We'll explain a lot of other things. So chapter 9, here we go. Now we can understand why this parsha opens with the din of Eved Ivri. Right? We asked in chapter 2, if the whole emphasis is on Avdos, is on servitude, so start with the ultimate form of servitude, which is Eved Kanaini, a non-Jewish slave. Why are you starting with a Jewish slave? So he says like this, Because the ultimate it's just to be obedient. There's no kunz. It's not a big deal. We're talking about a form of service of Hashem. So what's the ultimate form of service of Hashem, of servitude and of obedience, is when the avdus comes with pleasure. When the servitude, when that obedience comes with pleasure and enthusiasm. And that, this form of servitude, that on the one hand there's total servitude, on the other hand there's pleasure and there's enthusiasm, that you find specifically by the Eved Ivri. In other words, if we opened with just with the Eved Kanani, so then what would I think that's expected is merely a form of obedience, just obedience. Forget about your pleasures, your excitement, your enthusiasm. It's not relevant. The ultimate form of service that we're starting, or at least the foundation, the first step of service is complete obedience. Forget it. Nobody cares about your enthusiasm. You're enthusiastic or not. Just do what you have to do. Do as you're told. But since we're setting up, establishing what the optimal way of serving Hashem is, right? And this is a general message to all of our observance. So he starts specifically with Eved Ivri to tell us what the ultimate form of avdus that's expected of us is. The ultimate form of servitude is one that has enthusiasm and passion. How do we see that that's by Eved Ivri? So he explains. So if Yuvan Zalpi, Masha Kasavad Marazakim B'Dira Maskal V'Chim Karishis B'Tei La'ama, this is Maimer of the Alter Rebbe, with the title V'Chim Karish as B'Tei La'ama. That's actually the next part of our, the next parsha over in Parsha Shratim, after the one we're talking about Kisik and Eved Ivri, is this one, Kiyim Karish as B'Tei La'ama. So this Maimer is brought in the Mamarim of the Tzemach Tzedek of the Mittel Rebbe, and the Tzemach Tzedek Kaisav al Maimer Zeh. Oh, I'm sorry. We skipped. We missed note 55. Maybe if we have time, we'll come back to it. Okay, let's just keep going here. The Tzemach Tzedek writes about this Maimer. In his Maimer, in the Torah, he says that he describes that this Maimer is a Maimer nechbad. It's like a well-formulated, important. It's a significant Maimer of the Alter Rebbe. And it talks about the topic of the Maimer is the Tzaddik, the Rasha, and the Beinoni, right? The three personalities we're familiar with from Tanya. So the Gimel Mini Avodim Sheba Parshas Mishpatim, the three types of servants that we talk about in Parshas Mishpatim, which are Eved Kanani, right, the non-Jewish servant, Eved Ivri, a Jewish servant, Va'ama Ivri, and a Jewish maidservant. Same Gimel Madreges Baved Hashem. These three are three forms of service of Hashem. So we have Tzaddik, Rasha, Beinoni, three categories in people, and you also have three forms of servants. Right? There's three categories. There's Eved Kanani, Eved Ivri, and Amma Ivriya that are discussed in Parshas Mishpatim. So he says like this. Eved Kanani, hu sharatzim v'ataynik shleihim beprikas oil. What's the Eved Kanani? Eved Kanani means somebody whose pleasure and desire is in prikas oil, in frivolity, in just being completely loose and free. Right? Free of morally. What? Right, like the Gemara says, it's interesting. The Gemara quotes this obviously a lot. The Gemara Avda Befkeri Nichale. In the Gemara, so Avda Befkeri Nichale means Avda and Eved. Is Befkeri prefers to be hefker, to be free. Nichale, that's where he has his pleasure, his interest lies in. He'd rather be free. So in the Gemara, when it says Avda Befkeri Nichale, it means that a slave would rather remain a slave than be a free person, because as a slave, the expectations, his moral expectations are lower for a slave. That maybe doesn't sound right. But it's a specific law. Certain laws in the Torah are loosened and relaxed for Eved, for a slave. So he'd prefer that. It's a freer kind of a lifestyle as a slave. So in the Gemara, it uses the term Avda Befkeri Nichale. He'd rather remain a slave because he has a freer life. But in Chassidus, it uses it the other way, with the same result, by the way, but the other way. That Avda Befkeri Nichale was a person who would rather not be Hashem's servant. He'd rather be free to do as he pleases. Either way, it means the end result means the same thing, both in the Gemara and the way Chassidus explains it, but it depends what we're talking about. Right? The bottom line is, though, he'd rather not be limited and restricted morally. He wants to do what he wants as he pleases. So in the Gemara, it's talking about he'd rather do it as he pleases. He's more free to do that as a slave. In Avodas Hashem, and serving Hashem, he's free to do that by not being a servant of Hashem at all, by being free of the burden, so to speak, of serving Hashem. Yeah. So that's a Eved Kanani, meaning, what does this mean? Avda Befkeri Nichale. Shahnachas ruach shalei nicha is nachas ruach. He teaches nicha, which means he'd prefer, his preference, but here he teaches nachas, necha, as the word nachas, that his pleasure is in hefkeris. Prikas oil, removing the yoke, or throwing the yoke of heaven off of him. So he's still an Eved. An Eved Knaini, we're saying, is an Eved who would rather be free. His pleasure is in not serving. but he's still an Eved, meaning that he still serves. He's still a servant. It's just that where is his pleasure? His pleasure is what would he rather be doing? He'd rather be doing something else. But he's still doing what he has to do, meaning it's mitzad hechech, because he's forced to do it, because he's a servant. What's the hechech by Eved? What compels him to serve? A slave is afraid of being abused by his master. And so therefore, since he doesn't want to be punished by his master, he gets in line, he does what he wants to do, what the master wants. But really, he'd rather not be doing what the master wants. He'd rather be doing what he wants. Now, how does this translate in Ruchnius, in our Avodas Hashem? You might think, Hakas HaShevet, what does that mean? A person, if we're talking about an Eved Ivri and Avodas Hashem, what's an Eved Ivri and Avodas Hashem? A Yid serves Hashem, he'd rather do what he wants. He doesn't want to serve Hashem. But why does he serve Hashem? Because Hakas HaShevet, he's afraid of being whipped. What does that mean? Gehenim, right? He's afraid of punishment. Right? He's afraid of being struck by lightning. So Chassidus doesn't teach it like this. It's interesting. I think, for the most part, certainly, in Chassidus, the idea of being afraid of punishment doesn't even register on the list of it's not registered as a form of service of Hashem. Fear of punishment, of Gehenim, of retribution, of being struck down by lightning, that doesn't register as a motivation in serving Hashem. So what's Hakas HaShevet mean? What's Hakas HaShevet mean? If there's no place for it in Chassidus, so he says like this: the Inyan Hakas HaShevet Beruchnius, what is spiritual fear of fear of the whip, is Hushameir by Nafshay Halekis. It means that his soul is shines within him. It's just that revelation of the soul, his awareness of his soul, merely relates to action. It keeps him in line. What does this mean? So you have like this. You have a person who we have within a person. You have and we're gonna clarify this, get into this now a little bit more. You have your actions, you have your behaviors, the things you do. Then you have also your feelings, how you feel inside, right? So that your outsides, the things you do, your behaviors, that includes machshava dibur ma'aser, your levushim, right? Your thought, speech, and action. That's how you behave. That's how you behave. Then you have also your passions, what you feel inside. Okay, so when we talk about the Hakas HaShevet, what does it mean, fear of the Shevet? So the Rebbe explains in the Maimer the idea of Hakah means it presses on him. It impresses on the person, the conscious person who's not so sensitive to the soul. He has his pleasures, his insights, his interest, his enthusiasm, his interest lie in Elamazah, in materialism, and in doing whatever he would rather do, his worldly desires, his earthly desires. But the Shevet, which is a reference to the Neshama, as Alter Rebbe explains, that is maket. It nudges at him, right? You'd call it, maybe it's not exactly the same thing, but it would be similar in a way to a conscience that keeps gnawing at you, right? Where you maybe should be doing something else. So the fact that some people just turn it off, they don't even have a conscience, or they seem to operate without a conscience. Then there are people who always have that conscience, always telling them. So what happens when you have your conscience telling you something? You get frustrated. Why? Because I'd rather be doing something else. So why do you have to remind me that this is the wrong thing? I should be doing something else. So there's something else that's happening. So what does that do? If you have this inner voice that's telling you, you shouldn't be doing that, you should be doing this, right? And you're feeling bad about it, right? And so it could keep you aligned. So you're going to do what your conscience is telling you is the right thing to do. But if that's what's motivating you, what does that tell you? That really you have no interest in doing that. You need something else to sort of pull you in to do the right thing. But if you're left to your own devices, you'd be doing something entirely different. Maybe even the opposite, right? So that's what it means. Hakas HaShevet means that there's something outside of the person. Obviously, your neshama is you, but here we're talking about the part of the neshama that's not felt in the person on a conscious level, and something outside of him that's compelling him to do it, that keeps reminding him, no, you have to. This is what you have to do. So since he's now sensitive to his neshama on some level, in some way, so that keeps him aligned. So his behavior is proper.
It's not a fear of punishment in any way.
It's not. It's not at all a fear of punishment. It's a fear of God, not a fear of punishment. Correct. That's exactly what we're saying. That when we say Hakas HaShevet, when you're talking an Eved, an actual human being that's a servant, so there he might have a fear of actual punishment. But here, when we're talking about an avodah, we're not talking about a fear of punishment. You're not doing it because you're afraid for your life or you're afraid of being harmed. You're doing it because your neshama is telling it's the right thing to do. This is what you should be doing. Hakas HaShevet means that you can't escape your neshama that says, I'm a Yid, I shouldn't be doing that. I have to be doing this because I'm a Jew. So in other words, the impact though of the neshama on the person is not like suddenly now he has any interest in serving Hashem. He doesn't have interest in serving Hashem. It's just that the effect of his neshama is to an extent that keeps him in line that he serves Hashem. So he's actually serving God. But he's not interested in that. But that's what he's doing. So in other words, Avda Befker Nichli means for himself, he'd rather be doing something else. He's not interested in serving. He wants to be free of any kind of servitude. But his neshama is gnawing at him, and therefore he does what he has to do. Right? So the impact of the neshama is not one that extends into his insights, to his feelings, to his emotions, that he should now be enthusiastic and passionate about it. It's just enough to get him, to keep him in line.
That's exactly what Neil says. It's Jewish guilt.
You could maybe call it that. But even guilt is something else, because even guilt is not about Hashem. It's about your own guilt. So guilt, okay. Okay, I hear you, but it's not exactly the same thing. But guilt is very problematic. There's really no place for guilt in Judaism altogether. We've discussed that in the past a little, I think. Also, it's a big myth. It's a big myth. There's no such thing as guilt in Judaism. It doesn't exist. I mean, there are certainly Jews that feel guilty about things, and it maybe motivates them, but it's not a form of serving Hashem. It's not a form of service.
It's all in nature.
Your mother makes you feel guilty.
Yeah, you can't start asking personal questions when we're streaming live online, like... Okay. So he explains like this. So 1 second. He said, it's interesting. You have like this. You have, we said that this mimer of the Alter Rebbe that we're now quoting talks about Tzaddik, Rasha, and a Beinoni. Right? These three categories, the Tzaddik, Rasha, and Beinoni. Then we said we have another three categories, the ones that we're talking about from our Parsha, Evet Kanani, Evet Ivri, and Amma Ivriya. What did we say about an Evet Kanani? What's an Evet Kanani in a divine service? Somebody who really would rather be doing something else. But because his neshama is hitting him, so to speak, keeps nudging him, so therefore he stays in line and he does what he has to do. He serves the master faithfully. He serves Hashem. So what type of person is that? If we were to apply it to the Tzaddik, Rasha, Beinoni, it would be a Beinoni. Why? Because the Beinoni has perfect control over his behavior, right? And here we're saying Avid Ivri means somebody who controls. The Hakas HaShevet, the Neshama shining in him, is enough to keep him in line, right? So we're talking about Avid Kanani. Yeah? So the Rebbe says no. That explains in the Maimer there that the Evet Kanani also includes the Rasha V'Tovlei. Why? The Kamoisha be'Evet Kipshutei. Efshe she'Evet Yechta l'Rabbai. Just as in a case of a literal servant, it's possible that the servant will betray his master. And yet, when his master punishes him, he goes back to doing what he has to do. He goes back to serving him properly. The same is true with regard to a divine service. Tainik Shaloiv, the person, because we're talking about Avid Kanani, meaning somebody who his own pleasure is in other things, not in divinity, not in godliness, not in Aveda, in his own material and physical pleasures and pursuits. So therefore, since that's his pleasure, so it's possible sometimes that your desires and your pleasures will get the best of you. And what will you'll indulge in them, which is a betrayal of God. It's a betrayal of your master. Nevertheless, since when he comes to his senses, he suddenly regrets what he did, so we can still call him an Eved. So it's interesting. In Tanya, the Alter Rebbe says a person, what's a Beinoni? A Beinoni is somebody who has perfect control over his actions. Not when we say actions, we mean his levushim, meaning his thought, speech, and action. Right? All three. He has perfect control of them. He never indulges in any of them. Right? So the moment he were to indulge in it, Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, we call him a Rasha. He's no longer a Beinoni. You call him a Rasha. Right? So if we're saying that an Eved is somebody who serves his master It's true, he does. We're calling him. It's a low level because he has other pleasures. He has no pleasure in servitude. He'd rather do other things. But because of his neshama, he's completely in line. He stays on the right line, in the right path. So if so, how we can say that a Rasha is also an Evet Kanani? A Rasha is not on the straight path. A Rasha doesn't have perfect control over himself, over his behaviors, over his levushim. So the Rebbe explains why. Because here, when we're talking about Avdus, what does it mean to be an Evet? If somebody is a servant of somebody else, yeah, so therefore they're committed to serving their master. What happens if they betray their master? Is it possible that a servant might betray their master, might do something wrong, might rebel against the master? It's possible. But what happens when they come back to their senses? They regret what they did and they go back to serving. Right? Or in other words, let me put it in other terms. Nobody, you grant control to somebody else over yourself. Nobody has the authority or the ability to control you. Right? If somebody else controls you, it's because, on some level, I'm talking about even like in our regular interpersonal relationships. Somebody says something to you that's offensive, that's hurtful. You give them that power by being hurt or allowing that hurt to fester and to sink in. You empower them with that, right? The moment you say this person has no authority over me, so then their words can slide off your back. I mean, it's a little bit more complicated. It's not so simple. But the point is, if this person has no power over you, they have no power over you. There's nothing they could do. There's nothing they could do to get you to serve them, right? So it's something you give them. The same is true with an Eved. A servant, if he betrays his master and then he regrets what he did, what does that show? That he's a servant. Because if he's not a servant, so he wouldn't care that he betrays his master. Sometimes you have a servant that runs away, and that's it. He leaves and is there. Now the master can't do anything to him. Why? Because he's broken free. Now he's free, and you could scream all you want, threaten all you want, he doesn't listen to him anymore because he's not beholden to him. Betray him, he comes back. Why? Because that person has that authority over him. So when we're talking about in serving Hashem, a Yid is subservient to God. Hashem is our master. You have pleasures elsewhere, so you're like an Evet Kanani. You have your other pleasures. You serve him maybe begrudgingly, even, let's say, or even if it's not begrudgingly, but it's not enthusiastically. And sometimes because you have your own interests and your own desires, sometimes they get the better of you. But what happens when you indulge in them, when you slip up? You feel bad. I shouldn't have done that. I betrayed my master. And you feel bad for betraying God. Why do you feel bad for betraying God? Because he's your master. If he's not your master, you wouldn't feel bad for betraying him. Right? Because he's nothing in your life. So in this context, we could still call a Rasha v'Tovloi, can still be called a Rasha. What's a Rasha v'Tovloi? Somebody who sometimes sins but feels bad. A Rasha v'Tovloi is somebody who doesn't care. That's somebody who's completely removed the yoke of heaven from himself, and he just, he just goes on his merry way and doesn't look back. He has no concerns, no regrets, nothing. He's completely liberated himself, so to speak, from God's jurisdiction. But a Rasha v'Tovloi is somebody who has regrets. It says Rishoyim Meleim Charata, right? That the Rishoyim are full of regret. Why? Because God is their master too. It's just that their own desires get the best of them, and so the moment they come to their senses, they regret it. So they can also be called an Eved. And yet, at the same time, a Beinoni is also Eved Kanani. How so? Uli idach, and on the other hand, Gama Beinoni Daget Tachtoni Shebe Beinoni Nichol BeEved Kanani. So on one hand, we're putting the Rasha in the category of Evet Kanani, and at the same time, we're putting a Beinoni also in that category. Why? How could you put a Beinoni in there? What? Yes. So we'll see. How are we doing on time? You okay? Okay. Let's see. We'll have to be two parts. Okay. Let's try and get through the paragraph here. How could you say that a Beinoni is an Evet Kanani if we know Tanya that a Beinoni never commits a sin, right? And in fact, he's in a situation now, in a state, the Beinoni is in a state where it's not even possible for him to commit a sin. Nevertheless, since the Beinoni's own interests and desires are in the pleasures of this world, material pleasures, and he serves God also only because he has to. Right? Meaning, because he's God, and he has an neshama, and he's a Yid, so therefore he has to serve God. The difference between the Rasha v'Tovloi and the Beinoni is the Rasha v'Tovloi, the impact that his neshama has on him, this fear of the Hakaras HaShevet, meaning the influence that his neshama has on him, is only enough is enough to keep him in line most of the time, but not all of the time. Why? Because really what's got a grip on him are his own desires. By the Beinoni, the impact that the neshama has on him is even stronger, to the point where it's impossible for him to betray God. And that impacts him every moment of every day. Nevertheless, he still hasn't left that category of Eved Kanani, because at the end of the day, even this Beinoni, who has perfect control over his actions, even he, though the reason he has that control is because inside it's only influencing him in regard to his action. So in other words, we start saying that you have, like Tanya talks about the levushim and the midos, right? You have midos and you have your moichin. So so you have like this: a person has his actions, right? Which are thought, speech, and action. That's your behavior, the way a person behaves. Then you have also your emotions, which is how you feel. So the Beinoni, how does he feel on the inside? The Beinoni on the outside, and in terms of actions, in Tanya, yeah. In terms of behavior, when you look at a Beinoni, he looks exactly like a tzaddik because he has perfect control over his behaviors. And yet, who's the Beinoni more similar to? He's more similar to the Rasha. Why? Because if you lift the hood and you look under the surface, beneath the surface, the Beinoni inside, his passions, his excitement, his interests are more in line with the Rasha than they are with the tzaddik. The difference is, to what extent does his neshama impact him that he can gain self-control? Right? So by Beinoni, he's got perfect control. By Rasha, he's less control. By the higher end Rasha. Right? There's less control. Either way, they're being controlled by something else. Inside, they don't. That's not what they want. Inside, their passions lie somewhere else. Okay, so that is with regard to Eved Kanani. So then, what's an Eved Ivri? If we're saying that the Beinoni is both includes the Rasha and the Beinoni, so what's the Eved Ivri? So he says like this: Eved Ivri hu sharatzim v'ataynik shaloi hu beikar b'avodas Hashem. The Eved Ivri is somebody whose pleasure and desire is primarily, he says, be'ikar, primarily, not exclusively, but primarily in serving Hashem. And this idea of prikas oil, of shedding of rejecting the yoke of heaven, right? And including the pleasures of this world, they're very painful for him. They're very painful when a person, so again, we're talking about a Beinoni, obviously, here as well, right? In other words, there's a Beinoni whose primary pleasure and interest lies in serving Hashem. He still also has pleasures from this world, and yet when he recognizes the pleasures that he has in this world, and he sees them, and he encounters them, and he enjoys something materialistic, or if he even indulges in it in some way, even if it's in a permissible way, which wouldn't put him in the category of Rasha, it bothers him, it hurts him, it's painful to him, it's demeaning to him. So that bothers him, meaning that's not where he's... So there's pleasure there, but at the same time, that's not the pleasure that he's looking for. So so when he has something materialistic, something of this world, something physical, he enjoys it. Nevertheless, his desire is to not want them. So when he finds something that he wants that's not godly, that's materialistic, he wants it on the one hand, but really what he really wants is to not want it. So he's conflicted when it comes to that. It bothers him. It frustrates him. And he feels bitter and saddened by the fact that he's enjoying the physical pleasures. This level is the primary level of a Beinoni. So there's a lower end of Beinoni, which is somebody who's a Beinoni, has full control over himself, but has no real pleasure in godliness. But then you have a Beinoni whose real pleasure isn't godliness. So in other words, on the inside, he's already starting to look a little bit more like tzaddik. He's already starting to change the inside. We don't have time to fully explain this. We'll talk about this. We'll continue this in the next class. Let's just finish the paragraph here. But that's Eved Ivri and Eved Kanani and Eved Ivri. And what's Amo Ivriya, the third category? So Amo Ivri, he madreges tzaddik. The Jewish maidservant, that's already the level of tzaddik. Whose insides, whose emotions, whose feelings have been transformed to holiness. It's transformation that's higher than breaking. Kimavur Shamaruch as explained there in the Maimer, and we will explain Mitzvah Hashem later in the next class.